Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. It's so great to be hosting this, the Graduate Institute, and having Brian Luke Seaward here. And as many of you already know, he's renowned and respected internationally for stress management and what it does for the mind, body, spirit, healing in general. And Brian Luke has written, I can't even count the number of books you've written, Brian. There's so many of them on this subject, and you've been interviewed worldwide by the best of the best, because you are the best of the best. And we are so honored to have you here. So welcome, Brian Luke Seaward.
Great, thanks, Joyce. It's a real pleasure to be here. And let's see, I want to say thanks to everybody at the Graduate Institute. And I'm a real big fan of the Institute. We'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation here. But thanks to everybody who made this possible. And thanks to everybody here tonight. It's a real pleasure. I see some faces I know, and I think I have some former students and some friends in the audience. So good to see everybody. Even if I can't see you, I know you're out there, so thanks. I like to begin by saying happy belated St. Patrick's Day. For those who have any kind of Irish heritage, there we go with that. And keep in mind the 4-leaf clover. That number 4 is going to come up a nice few times here. Well, I got to tell you that I have more content than we had time for. I wish I had a few hours to share with you, but in case we don't cover it all, I want to cover my butt by saying that a lot of the information you're going to hear, all the information you're going to hear here is found in these books. Don't buy these books. You can get them at a library. But I just want to cover my butt and say that that's where we are. So I want to begin by saying that about 30 some years ago, I met the most remarkable woman. Her name was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And you may know her from her famous book on death and dying, her work on the topic of death and dying. But she was actually not at this conference to speak about that. She was at the Second International American Holistic Medical Association Conference, and she was a keynote speaker, and her topic was wellness. And she said, whenever you hear the word wellness, she goes, I want you to think of a circle. And as she said this, she drew a big circle in a flip chart. And then she drew a line north and south and east to west. And she said, the circle is a universal symbol of wholeness. And as she said this, she talked about how the full moon, the sun, various symbols we see in our cultures, whether it's in nature or in our own culture, we have circles as a symbol of wholeness. And she said that, take a look around, and I gotta tell you, I travel a lot. And she said the word wellness is new to the American vernacular. This is back, about 30, 40 years ago. So it's not quite so new now, but she said the word wellness is actually not the same thing as health. She said health is basically thought to be the absence of disease, but wellness is, she said, is a lot more than that. And as she said this, she said, keep your eye on the circle. And I just thought I'd tell you that the premise of the wellness is that the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts, which is why the circle is such a significant symbol here. And as she said this, she said, look and see where you see symbols of the circle. And so I thought to myself, I've seen it when I go to Ireland. There's a wonderful place in the Dingle Peninsula called Galler's Oratory, and this is actually a headstone there. If you just see a circle there with 4 quadrants, but I also happened to be out in Tahiti not too long ago, and I saw this carved into a stone, a volcanic stone. It's the turtle. It's the symbol of the Polynesian culture. And if you look closely, you'll see a circle as part of its shell and 4 quadrants there. And then, of course, I don't live too far from New Mexico, so every now and then I get a chance to go down there. And this is one of the petroglyphs you'll see when you see some of the rock paintings and the art there. And again, you see a circle with 4 quadrants. And Kubler-Ross mentioned this time. She said that whenever you talk about wellness, you're looking at basically 4 components. And she said, if you talk to the shamans, the sages, the wisdom keepers, and the healers of all times, all cultures, all languages, and ask them, well, what exactly are these 4 components? You're going to hear them say this: mind, body, spirit, and emotions. Mind, body, spirit, emotions. And she said that we tend to put a lot of our attention on the bottom right-hand quadrant, because this is the most tangible, this is the most visible, most measurable. You can measure height, weight, blood pressure, you can measure cholesterol levels, you can measure the DNA right now. We got that down really well. This is really safe territory to stand on, because this is actually very, very quantifiable. However, she said, this is not the whole wellness paradigm. We've got 3 other components, and we tend to put some mention to emotions, into mental well-being. You may have heard of the book called Emotional Intelligence, that kind of like brought that to a highlight. But she said, if you don't honor the integration, balance, and harmony of all 4 components, including this one, then we're going to end up with dysfunction. Now, I got to tell you, back in 1981 or so, dysfunction was not that commonly a used word. Today, it's a national adjective. And so this is where the focus of this presentation is going to be. And I'll never forget what she said. She said that we need to honor this, because if we don't, then we're doing basically a half-baked job with health, well-being, and health education, health care, all that such. This was not the first time I ever heard someone talk about this. She definitely put it in the mat for me and gave it a lot of credibility. But it turns out that, a little comic relief here, we've come a long way since she made this presentation. Now we have books called Spirituality for Dummies. I got to tell you that this book basically has got some confusion going on, but we'll get to that later. But this is back when I was in high school. One of my teachers there introduced us to the work of Carl Gustav Jung, and I took an immediate liking to him because I just saw that he was not as iffy about things as compared to his mentor Freud. Well, one of my favorite expressions that Carl Jung said was this. He said, every crisis over the age of 30 is a spiritual crisis. And then he came back and added this to it. He said, spiritual crises require spiritual cures. I have a feeling that if he were alive today, and he died like about 1961 or so, but if he were alive today, he would get rid of this age limit altogether, because I think he's of the opinion that, and I am too, that every crisis, no matter how old you are, is a spiritual crisis. And how do we deal with spiritual crises? We actually need what he calls spiritual cures. Some people call these inner resources. I think that was Abraham Maslow's take on things. But there's lots of different names, but really what it comes down to is we have the means to work with this. But I discovered you cannot talk about human spirituality and health of the human spirit, and now I even say triumph of the human spirit, without addressing the topic of stress. And that's because the two kind of go hand in hand. A lot of people think that spirituality is warm, fuzzy puppies and beautiful sunsets. And that's part of it. That is not the whole part of it, the whole aspect of it. And so it turns out that we need to actually see the bigger picture. And stress helps us do that. So a couple of cultural literacy headlines. I see these magazines when I check out the grocery store. And so maybe you've seen them too, but here's a few more. And now we got this. We got the whole COVID thing going on. And this has been a lot of stress for a lot of people. I just heard on NPR's news this morning that so many women under the age of 40 are showing up in healthcare clinics with problems of cirrhosis of the liver. So we have a huge drinking problem going on with COVID. Don't think that we're done with this the minute everyone gets a vaccination. The mental health care crisis is coming like a tsunami. But we also have some previous headlines that basically try to tell us that stress is good for us. I'm thinking, yeah, to a point, but we're so far beyond that point, it's ridiculous. And then we see things like this, what we're losing on the internet and the resistance to rises. I like this, work is hell. Now, people have been thinking this for quite some time, but now we have cartoons to show us that. And of course, the whole addiction to technology. And I won't go on and on, but you get the idea. But stress is very much a part of our culture. So, we could have stress going to work. This could be like on 84, 86 or the Merritt Parkway. We have stress at work. We have stress going home from work. This is definitely maybe like 91 or something like that. And maybe you have seen someone like do this, hopefully not. Even in summertime, we have people who have stress going home from work, see what's on top of her car. We've probably all done this to some extent, but we're seeing a lot more of this lately too. But then we have stress when we get home. Insert laugh now. Well, it turns out that every demographic has stress, every age group. It is called the equal opportunity destroyer. And when I say that everyone's got stress, I mean that everyone's got stress. In fact, it's worse than this. It's when I say that everyone's got stress, I mean everyone. I didn't believe in reincarnation until I saw this picture, but I got to tell you right now, something's going on. By the way, in my presentations, I was shown this before, and one guy came up to me and said, I want to find out how you got a photograph of my daughter. I've heard that question come about 4 times now. So apparently a lot of kids know how to do this. But it's not just kids. I gave a talk at Quaker Oats, and a woman said to me, you need the next picture of this wonderful crescendo. And I said, there's more? And she goes, oh, honey, you have no idea. She goes, I'll email you a JPEG. And the next day I get this that comes in and says, even the animal kingdom is stressed. So stress is definitely a part of the phenomenon here. Maybe you know this cat. Then I saw this picture. It just last in the trilogy here, but looks like someone forgot to meditate here. So you see someone in a robe like that, you see this, you think, uh-oh. But I love this quote. It says that The winds of grace are blowing perpetually. We only need raise our sails. So keep that in mind as we go through this, because stress and spirituality are definitely partners in the dance of life. So real quickly, what's the nature of stress? I know this isn't a talk on stress, it's a talk on spirituality, but like I said, the two are hand in hand. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. So stress is both acute, can be acute or chronic, very short term, very long term. I think that's all I'll say for that right now. We could go on for hours on that one slide, but let's keep on going. So how do we define stress? Well, that's a problem, because the field of psychology thinks they've got it wrapped up. The field of anthropology's got it. How about theology? And we got physiology. Everyone seems to have a take on it. And the problem is they don't all speak to each other. So there's lots of definitions, but I'll give you a couple to throw some out. Hans Selye, the great stress researcher, said that stress is wear and tear in the body. And that makes a lot of sense. All you got to do is think about a tension headache and think, yeah, that's very true. But then we have Richard Lazarus, very, very famous psychologist, who said that stress is the inability to cope with problems, a very cognitive-based definition. Then we also have a definition that says stress is a loss of emotional control. All you got to do is think about road rage, and yep, that makes sense. And then I like this one the best. It says that stress is the absence of inner peace. You cannot be stressed and be relaxed at the same time, virtually impossible. Well, if you were to get a bunch of people into a room who are all experts in stress management and say no one's leaving till we get a consensus, you might hear them say this, that stress is a perceived threat. And we're going to put the words perceived in quotes, because two people can have the same experience and one person can be freaking out, the other person is not. But we say stress is a perceived threat. And then we say real or imagined, because we can all make mountains out of molehills. You know, I love the quote from Mark Twain, who says, "I'm an old man now, and I've known a great many problems in my life, most of which never happened." So stress is a perceived threat, real or imagined, to our mind, body, spirit, or emotions. And I think that's going to cover the umbrella definition for what we want here. But we also have this definition. Stress is any change you encounter in your life. And think about the last year. Oh my God, the year of the pandemic. We've had beaucoup change. Everything from not going to your favorite restaurant to the cancellation of the Olympics to high school graduations, you name it. You know, we could spend hours on that example too. But by and large, people don't like change. And they specifically don't like change, which things that they can't control. So there is the problem. You know, I love the expression that says the only person who likes change is a wet baby. The rest of us do not like change. So there's one more definition for you. But how about this? Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. That's a great definition of stress too. I think I got one more for you coming up. So same situation, different interpretation. You know, when I saw this meme on Facebook, I grabbed it. The quote underneath was with the kid with the green t-shirt says, I told my twin brother he's adopted. A little humor and comic relief there. But we do have a different way to interpret things. And that really is what stress comes down to. Like take, for example, this guy, you know, it looks like everyone's freaking out. So this guy is very calm, cool, and collected, or he's on drugs. I'm not sure which, but you get the idea. So stress is a perception. I'm going to give you a little stress test here. The question is, what do you see? Do you see a young woman or an old woman? I don't have the means to actually, with a highlighter to show you what they are, but they're both there. The question is, what do you choose to put your attention on? And what we typically say is, every situation has a good side and a bad side. Each moment, you decide. Well, this guy is not in the driver's seat. Would you agree? But he's also not falling off the bike, which I think is a real testament to idea of balance. And that's really what this idea of stress and coping with stress comes down to, with the spiritual component. So one more definition for you, it goes like this. Stress is a perceived disconnection from our divine source. And what this really implies is that we are never disconnected from the divine source, whatever you choose to call this, whatever you perceive this to be. But if we have issues of unresolved issues of anger and fear, it tends to cloud our vision and we feel like we're cut off. We feel like we're abandoned, or feel like we're ignored. And so this definition packs a wallop in terms of the ideas of stress and spirituality. I love this cartoon. It says, look, I've got a real busy day planned. I don't have time for a complete shakedown of my belief system. And I think when we go through stress and all hell breaks loose, it does rattle our cage and our belief system. And so if you find this humorous, then I did my job. Okay, so there's two emotions with stress. Okay, there's actually hundreds, but they fall nicely and neatly in two categories. Anger is a fight response, fear is a flight response. And there are hundreds of emotions, each of aspects of this. But here's another take on it. Why do people lie? Why do people steal? Why do people kill? Unresolved issues of anger and fear. And so you're going to see this comes up time and time again as a gross violation of any of the codes of law, ethics, or commandments, whatever you want to call them. I love this wisdom from Yoda. You might recognize this. Anybody, if we have any Star Wars fans out there, he says, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. It was a very spiritual message there and a very spiritual movie, but we'll leave it there for now. So we talk about this idea of dissolving the veils of illusion. This is an expression from the Eastern culture, a lot of great wisdom from the Eastern culture about stress and spirituality, about spirituality as a whole. But really what they say is that we have these veils of illusion. And if we can part through the veils, we can see beyond to a different perception, different reality. But what causes these veils? Unresolved issues of anger and fear. And a lot of people have that right now. So I love this quote from Carl Jung. He says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And one thing we have to get around is the ego. I saw this picture here. I thought it was really beautiful because it speaks volumes here, but we'll come back to this. But the ego is really this dance of spirituality and stress, this dance of the ego and the soul. And the ego is not the bad guy. The ego actually is very important. It's what triggers a stress response. It's your bodyguard, but it only should be your bodyguard. It should not be the CEO. And the minute it gets out of that capacity, all hell can break loose. And we've seen all kinds of examples of that on a daily basis. So there's a wonderful expression in the Eastern culture that says, learn to domesticate the ego. I love that. And the implicit message here is if we don't, we're going to have poop all over the place. And so I've been looking far and wide to find somebody who did a really great job to explain on how to domesticate the ego. And, you know, we could talk about meditation. That definitely is a great way to do it. But I found someone who did a great job. Her name is Audrey Hepburn. Oh, I forgot I had the slide. It says, if you don't tame the kitten, the lion will eat you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, so Audrey Hepburn has some great beauty tips, and see if this makes any sense about domesticating your ego. She says this: for attractive lips, speak words of kindness. For lovely eyes, seek out the good in people. For a slim figure, share your food with the hungry. For beautiful hair, let a child run his or her fingers through it once a day. For poise, walk with the knowledge that you never walk alone. People, even more than things, have to be restored, renewed, revived, reclaimed, and redeemed. Never throw out anyone. And remember, if you ever need a helping hand, you'll find one at the end of each of your arms. And as you grow older, you'll discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself and the other for helping others. Isn't that beautiful? Well, how do we define human spirituality? I'm glad you asked. And we could be here forever because this has not been an agreed upon concept. In fact, this discussion has been going on for millennia. We're not going to wrap it up tonight. But what are some definitions? Let me give you one. It comes to us from the World Health Organization, and it says this: spirituality is that which is in total harmony with the perceptual and the non-perceptual environment. Things you can see and sense, and things beyond your ability to see and sense. But they didn't stop there. They went one step further. They said this: the existing definition of health should include the spiritual aspect, and that healthcare should be in the hands of those who are fully aware of and sympathetic to the spiritual dimension. Now, if I was on a stage in front of a podium and had you out in the audience here, I'd ask, show of hands, who had this in your education? And most people will not raise their hands. What I love about the Graduate Institute is that they do acknowledge this is an important concept to teach and to integrate into healthcare, health education, and to all of life, really. So the World Health Organization is not a foo-foo organization. It's got some credibility to it. We in the Western culture tend to be very, very dogmatic that if you can't measure it through the five senses, it doesn't exist. But if you go back to this definition here, spirituality is that which is in total harmony with the perceptual, five senses, and non-perceptual environment, then you realize there's more going on than the five senses. And that's why this is so very important. Well, a lot of people, when they hear the word spirituality, think of religion. And I want to tell you right now, they're not the same thing. They definitely have some crossover. This, by the way, is the church that Celine Dion got married in. And I was there 5 years earlier. Some people, they think of spirituality, they think of unicorns and rainbows. And I got to tell you, that is not the way to go. That's not what spirituality is. Yeah, there may be some nice sunsets and rainbows, but no unicorns I've seen anyway. And some people think that it's all kind of like, seances and speaking to dead people. No, we're not going to go there on that. But there is definitely common ground. Spirituality is inclusive. It's experiential. Religion's very exclusive. You cannot be Jewish and Baptist at the same time. I think we can all agree on that one. But there is some common ground. It's to bring you to a deeper sense of the divine, whatever you choose to call that, whatever you perceive that to be. I came across this slide I thought was pretty cool. It's religion and spirituality. This, by the way, is from the French culture. You can see spirituality is spelled a little differently than we might. And then I came across this quote I thought was pretty good too. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but again, people who have been around the block feel a little emboldened to share their thoughts. And it says, religion is for people who are trying to avoid hell. Spirituality is for those who've already been there. I talked to one of my friends who's a priest about this, and he says, yeah, we're taught this in a seminary. And I said, you are? And he goes, yeah, in fact, we're taught a little expression that goes like this, that God has many, the church has not, and the church has many that God has not. And I thought, wow, teaching that seminary, how cool is that? Well, I have discovered far and wide that there's no language to really wrap up spirituality. It's very ineffable. You try to explain what it is, but it just evades definition, evades explanation. There's no language. There's no language of Spanish, Russian, Swahili, German, Japanese. No one can do an adequate job. But I did find one language, the language of metaphor. That, when you can't really explain things in words, people tend to jump to metaphor. And there's two metaphors that are used to describe human spirituality: water and mountains. So water, lots of containers. These are like the religions that actually hold the water. But if the containers break or crack, the water's still there. And water, whether it's frozen or liquid or gas, is all around us. It's all there. And so there's lots of names for this. I put up the divine essence. You may have a different word. The word God's pretty popular these days. However, in the past 10, 20 years, we've also heard the word Allah, which is pretty popular too. But if you lived in China, you might use the word the Tao. The American Indian culture uses the expression the Great Mystery or the Creator. Lots of different names for this. And what's important is that you find a name that you're comfortable with. I probably should just leave that little area that says divine blank and let you fill it in yourself. But this is what everyone's talking about when they talk about spirituality: a connection to something bigger than yourself. It may be really hard to explain, to articulate, to define, but at some level, everyone has some sense that there's something else going on in the course of their lives. Well, I'm fumbling, as you may have noticed, but I found someone who did a really good job to describe this. Her name is Maya Angelou, and she said these words: spirit is an invisible force made visible in all life. I believe that spirit is one and is everywhere present, that it never leaves me. I may withdraw from it, but I can realize its presence the instant I return to my senses. I cannot separate what I conceive as spirit from my concept of God. Isn't that beautiful? Well, I think it's what's interesting to me right now is that for so long, spirituality was held very tightly in the hands of theologians who said, we'll tell you what this is. But now we're seeing that poets and playwrights, actors and athletes, politicians, think of Nelson Mandela, are talking about what spirituality is, and they're all right, because spirituality is inclusive. Well, if you live long enough, you're going to come across a concept called spiritual wake-up calls. And this is basically where something comes at you and wakes you up, or you say basically, what the heck's going on here? I noticed that a lot of people have been using the expression WTF for the past year. I think that kind of qualifies. So in this case here, wake-up calls are things which basically shake the tectonic plates that we're saying at the point that we question what's going on. And I saw this cartoon, I thought I'd share it. It says, this is what a spiritual awakening looks like. Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. You know, all of a sudden now that the ground's been pulled out from underneath you and you're wondering what the heck's going on. When this happens, and this happens to everybody, if you're living on planet Earth, I guarantee it's happened to you, and maybe it's happened more than once. And if it hasn't happened, it's going to happen, because this is part of the life experience. But when this happens, then there's a concept called a spiritual hunger. And that is when you begin to look for answers. You've got all these questions like, what the hell happened? But now you begin to look for answers, and you begin to look where you're most comfortable. And if you get answers, great. But a lot of people say, I'm not getting the answers I'm looking for, and they keep looking. And what we typically say is that spiritual hunger leads to spiritual exploration. Now, I often tell a story. Some of you, my students, may have already heard this before. They may have heard this whole talk before, but it's always good to hear it again, I think. When I was giving a talk at the Noetic Sciences Conference, a woman yelled out, she goes, I'm a Buddhist. And I said, well, thank you for sharing. And she said, I wasn't born a Buddhist, I was born a Baptist. And I thought to myself, okay, now there's an example of spiritual hunger that leads to spiritual exploration. She's looking for answers. We're all looking for answers, and you keep looking till you find something that makes sense to you. And so I thought I'd give you a little explanation. I know the people at the TGI, I know the makeup of, hopefully you'll enjoy this, we'll see. But this is a typical day in the life, and imagine that this could be you. So at 6 a.m., you do your TM meditation practice. 7 o'clock, drop the kids off to Catholic school. 10 o'clock, let's do Kundalini yoga class. 4 o'clock, we'll do a Buddhist satsang. 7 o'clock, don't forget the Sufi poetry class. And at 10 o'clock, we'll go look for ETs. If you can relate to any of this, my guess is that you have basically actively on the spiritual path. And congratulations, it's a big group. It's all of humanity. Well, mountains are also the metaphor. And it turns out that this is actually a mountain I climbed or tried to climb when I was in Switzerland. This is the Matterhorn. But I learned something when I was there. The Matterhorn goes by more than one name. It sits on the border of Italy and in Switzerland. And in Italy, they don't call it the Matterhorn. They call it Monte Cervino. And the French, they don't call it that. They call it Mont Cervin. And the British, they don't even call it that. They used to have their own name for it. They called it the Citadel. One mountain, 4 names. There's a message there. There's also a message with this. There's more than one way to the top. If I had my little pointer, I'd show you. You can go to the left side, the middle, the right side. And that's just on the Swiss side. I don't know how many different ways there are on the Italian side, but there's a message there too. There's more than one way to the top. Very, very important. Well, maybe you recognize this guy, his famous line, I've been to the mountain. Again, it's a very powerful metaphor in the language of spirituality. I love this quote. It says, look at every path closely and deliberately. Try it as many times as you think is necessary. Then ask yourself and yourself alone one question. Does this path have a heart? If it does, it's good. If it doesn't, then it's of no use. Well, I heard this one guy say the spiritual path is, and I thought, what's he going to say? I was trying to think in my mind where this is going. And I thought, you can't measure the spiritual path in years. You can't measure it in degrees. You can't measure it in possessions, but Lord knows we try. He said the spiritual path is between 14 and 16 inches. And I thought, where's he going with this? And he said, it's a path from your head to your heart. And I thought, touche. Well, one of my colleagues is Jean Shinoda-Boland. She's a Jungian analyst, and she has this quote. She says, we are not humans on a spiritual path. We are spirits on a human path. And I can't tell you the number of students I've had over the past 30, 40 years who've said to me, I've lived by all the right rules. I've done all the right things. Why did this bad thing happen to me? You get cancer, you lose a job, your marriage ends, something horrific, spiritual wake-up call. And you think to yourself, what did I do to deserve this? Nothing. I think if we see ourselves as humans on a spiritual path and all hell breaks loose, then we're going to feel abandoned. We're going to feel ignored. But if we see ourselves as spirits on a human path, that means that everything is open for experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if we can learn from all of this, then it's all good. That's the innate message to this spiritual path. Well, I came across this meme I thought I'd share with you. It says, being on a spiritual path does not prevent you from facing times of darkness. See, no rainbows and unicorns here, but it teaches you how to use the darkness as a tool to grow. And I thought, yeah, beautifully said. Well, I thought I'd share with you a little bit about this concept called soul health. We could call this spiritual health, but these are things that I think we need to actually work in the direction of, to show more gratitude, to show more joy, to have a sense of forgiveness with those we feel we've been wronged by. Use a sense of creativity, a very spiritual muscle, and exercise a sense of humor. By the way, I love this little thing I learned about humor. The word silly is a derivation of the word blessed. So when someone says to you, oh, don't be silly, damn right I'm gonna be silly. That's how important that is. And then of course, compassion. This is a short list of ways to help invigorate the health of the human spirit. But the ego gets in the way of all of these. Are you seeing the dance going on here? Well, if you would talk to the shamans, the sages, the healers, don't forget the mystics, the people who we call the wisdom keepers. Here's a contemporary one named Rose Perry from New Zealand. And ask these people, what exactly is human spirituality all about? This is what you're going to hear them say. It is comprised of three things: relationships, values, and a meaningful purpose in life. This is the hallmark of human spirituality. And these are not Catholic aspects or Jewish or Shinto or Buddhist or Islamic. They're human aspects of spirituality. And I can tell you right now that if you were to write down your top 10 stressors, 10 issues, problems, concerns, whatever, and put a check mark next to everyone that involves a relationship, put a check mark next to everyone that involves a value or a value conflict, put a check mark next to everyone that involves a meaningful purpose in life, you're going to see everything's checked off your list if you're honest with yourself. So is there a connection between stress and spirituality? Most definitely. So we have two kinds of relationships. We have one called internal relationships, how well we deal with ourselves. I'm going to go kind of fast here because time's getting short and I got like about 85 more slides. So hang in there, fasten your seatbelt. Next one's called external relationships, how we deal with everyone else. So this is just other people. I love the wisdom from the American Indian culture that says this is also the air you breathe, the ground you walk on, the water you drink. This is everything, because everything is connected. We are in relationship with everything. And that's so very important to realize. So internal and external. A personal value system. What are your values? If you really want to stop selling your tracks, ask them, well, what are your values? People would rather talk about their color underwear than this, until a crisis happens. Then all of a sudden the values come out. I would imagine that love is a value for everybody, but for other people, maybe creativity is. What the research shows is that you have about 4 or 5 core values, and then the rest of the values you have support the core values. And everyone's value system is different. And when values collide is when we see stress happening. So here's the big one we see in this country: freedom versus responsibility. 2 big values that everyone cherishes, but when they collide, all hell breaks loose. I'm not going to mention much about wearing face masks, but connect the dots. I think you'll get that there. So this is a very important part of stress and spirituality. And then we have a meaningful purpose in life. The age-old question, why are we here? Actually, there's 2 questions. Who are we and why are we here? So my question to you is, who are you? Who do you think you are? As a young kid, my mom would say to me, young man, just who do you think you are? If I thought she was asking a spiritual question, I would have given an entirely different answer. Insert laugh now. You can't hear anybody laugh at my jokes. So let me go back for a second because this is so important. This is the cornerstone of human spirituality. We can recommend a couple books to you. One I want to make sure that I mention to you is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, all about the meaning of life. Because if this is not there, you're going to feel like there's a vacuum. We've seen empty nesters who, husband turns to the wife or wife turns to the husband and says, "Who are you and why are you still here?" I work with Olympic athletes, and I can tell you the minute they got done with their last race at the Olympics, all hell broke loose. There's a name for it called Olympic blues. We hear this with people who retire when they wake up and say, "Now what do I do?" If there's no meaning, there's definitely stress. And so you can see how important this one is. This has a huge effect on overall health and well-being too. Well, I thought I'd share with you a great quote. There's a lot of them in this topic here, but this is my favorite. It says this: "My life has a superb cast, but I can't figure out the plot." Well, as hard as it is to make a definite spirituality, I tried. And the reason why is because when I got done with hearing Kubler-Ross, I went up to her to meet her like everyone else did. When it came my turn in line, she said to me, "Young man," I was about 23 at the time. She goes, "Young man," she goes, "What's your passion in life?" And I said, "Everything you've talked about, mind, body, spirit, emotions, the internet connection to all of this." She said, "I need your help." I said, "Okay, how?" And she said, "Would you help me and people like me reintroduce the ideas of human spirituality back into healthcare, back into health education?" And I said, "Sure, yeah." And when I did, I felt like I was landed by the queen. So in my work on stress and wellness, I do include the aspects of spirituality because I can tell you right now, without it, we're doing a half-baked job. So I made a definition. I'm going to tell you it's not very good because it's really hard to define spirituality, but here goes. Human spirituality is the maturation process of higher consciousness, as expressed through the dynamic interactions of three facets. Number one, an insightful and nurturing relationship with both oneself and others. Number two, strong personal value system. And number three, the cultivation and fulfillment of a meaningful purpose in one's life. That's a mouthful. And I'm going to tell you, it's not the best definition, but it's a starting point because once it's out there, we can now begin to discuss it, to talk about it. For so long, I can tell you that people in the health industry avoided this like the plague. It was the ignored component of wellness. And again, if you don't acknowledge it, we're going to have problems. We're going to have dysfunction. So there's a fourth pillar of spirituality. We talk about relationships, values, and purpose in life. There's one more, and it goes something like this. It's called a divine mystery. I think back to a conversation I heard with Oprah Winfrey when she apparently did a survey with I don't know how many thousands of people asking if they ever had a spiritual experience. 80% said yes. She figures the other 20% were lying because she figures everyone's had one. But the divine mystery is when something happens, maybe it's a synchronistic moment, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's something that reveals to you that there's more going on than meets the five senses. We typically say the curtain's been pulled back long enough to peer into the other portal of dimensions and see what's going on, long enough to realize something's going on. So we call this a divine mystery. And I'll give you some examples. This is a photograph of the Virgin Mary taken in Medjugorje, Yugoslavia. So one of my students gave this to me, but then another student gave me a similar one, which looks like the same thing, but on different occasions, I think. But how do you explain a photograph of Virgin Mary in a church wall that was blank? I don't know. It's a mystery. Then we have things like crop circles. I bet you didn't think you're going to hear about that tonight, but I can tell you right now, I have friends who actually investigate these. Frey Silva is one of them. And it turns out that some of these crop circles, the Japanese are so enthralled by these right now that they've asked and got permission to put cameras up in the fields in England to see what the hell's going on. They want to see if, there's two guys out there with rope and boards. Well, it turns out that the cameras show that some of these crop circles happen in 3 or 4 seconds. Look at the intricacy here. It's pretty amazing, huh? How's it happen? I don't know. It's a mystery. Maybe one day we'll find out, but right now it's a mystery. This is one of my friends. His name is Matt Feniger. Matt Feniger was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor at the age of 16. And there he's at Duke Medical Center. And they basically said, "Matt, you got about 6 months to live. We can't operate. We can't do chemo. We can't do radiation. You got 6 months at best." Well, then his father arranged a prayer ceremony for their town. Everyone came. Everyone prayed in the school gymnasium. for 3 hours. They prayed together, they prayed alone. They prayed in words, they prayed in songs. They prayed together, they prayed. And what showed was something miraculous happened. They went back down to Duke Medical Center, and the picture on the right there shows you when the doctor came out and said, Matt, I don't know how to explain this to you, but your tumor's gone. I don't think you ever had one. It's a miracle. And that's what we say, divine mystery. One more picture for you. There's a picture of me with a friend of mine named Matt. I'm actually in Ireland. They were giving me a present at the end of our tour. I take people on tours to Ireland, and it turns out that it's a mandala, a Celtic mandala. You see in his hand there. But do you see a circle on my sweater? That actually is not part of the sweater. That's actually a orb. And several people gave me pictures of this from different angles of the room. Something was going on, but it's almost like the spirits of Ireland were speaking to me when I got that present. How do you explain this? I don't know. It's a mystery. So we have an expression in the spiritual traditions that says, be a good mystic. And to be a good mystic doesn't mean that you can levitate or bilocate. It just merely means to appreciate the mystery. That is what we are called to do. Well, to kind of close things out, and again, I got more slides than I have time for here, but I would be doing a gross injustice if I didn't talk about this. All the wisdom keepers from around the world throughout the ages have talked about this concept of what I'm going to call as the seasons of the soul. And there's 4 distinct seasons, and they go like this. The centering process is like autumn, the emptying process like winter, the grounding process is like spring, and last but not least, the connecting process is like summer. And let's take a closer look. You take a look at the centering process, and you'll see the word enter. That means to enter the heart. This is actually, you can do it any time of year, not just like autumn, but really the reason we appropriate this to the autumn season is that in the autumn season, there's less light. So you go inside earlier. Now we're about to start spring, and we get more light because of daylight savings time. But in this case here, we do some soul searching. That's what this really comes down to. We enter the heart, and we begin to take a look at what's there. Thoughts, attitudes, perceptions, beliefs, things that at one time may have served us, but maybe they no longer do. And so this is a time for soul searching, to begin to question and see if things are still needed. Because as we go through life, we mature, and some things we thought were important when we were 20 aren't so important when we're 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. So the centering process is very important. And once you do this, then comes the empty process. This is like nature abhors a vacuum. So when you make room, something new is going to come, but you got to make room. This is the void. And a lot of people tend to avoid the void. But if you do that, then you're going to only have more problems. This is actually what people also call the dark night of the soul. And it turns out that it's only supposed to be a night, not supposed to be an eternity. And when we see it as an eternity, then all hell breaks loose. If we stay there too long, then I call this concept, we get spiritually constipated. Spirit, if I didn't mention it, is defined as breath or energy, both an inhalation and an exhalation. And spirit has got to move. It doesn't care how slow it goes, but it's got to move. If we get stuck, that's like being constipated. And this happens in the dark night of the soul. So we want to move out of this season, much as like winter. By the way, and Shakespeare was pretty clever. He had another name for this. He called this the winter of discontent, Richard III, if you know your Shakespeare. And so this is the winter of discontent. This is like winter time. But winter is always followed by spring, as we're about to find out in 2 days. By the way, I saw this quote. It says, the dark night of the soul comes just before revelation, when everything is lost and all seems darkness. Then comes the new life and all that's needed. That's Joseph Campbell, by the way, which another one of my heroes. Well, I came across this great quote. It says, when you come to the edge of all the light you have and must take a step into the darkness of the unknown, believe that one of 2 things will happen. Either there will be something solid for you to stand on, or you will be taught how to fly. Isn't that nice? Well, then comes the grounding process. This is the eureka moment. You've been looking for some new insight, some new nugget of cosmic wisdom, and you got it. You get to the mountaintop. And it turns out that this is the vision quest. This is the eureka moment. And now you have the means to go from point A to point B, or B to C, or C to D, and do it gracefully, as opposed to feeling lost and not knowing what the heck's going on. So this is like springtime. In springtime, we have new growth. We have new ideas, new possibilities, new life with leaves and trees and stuff, flowers. This is the grounding process. And we call it the grounding process because when you get that nugget of wisdom, you feel grounded. You feel like you're not going to get knocked over with the winds of change. But you're not done yet because we have one more season to go. And that season is called the connecting process. And for those who know the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell's work, this is the coming home, the last stage of the hero's journey. But in this stage of coming home, you share what you learned because greed is not a spiritual value. And so as a consequence of this, we share what we learned so that other people can benefit. And in doing so, this is the warm, fuzzy puppies. This is the sunsets. This is the wonderful euphoric feeling that everyone thinks spirituality is. Yeah, it is. But you got to do 3 other seasons to get there. You got to do the work before you have this celebration. And this is a celebration like summertime. So I typically ask people, what happens in summertime? You have reunions, you got barbecues, you got picnics, you got weddings, you got all kinds of things of people coming together. And that's what this is, a time of coming together to celebrate before the next chapter of the hero's journey where you go back off on autumn again. Well, one thing we learned about spirituality is everyone's got the potential, and the potential is made up of these things which I call, another picture there for you, the muscles of the soul. You know, when I talk to people who've been through a hellacious life experience, I ask them, how'd you get through this? You know, part of me wants to know selfishly, and part of me wants to know so I can teach my students. But I hear them say, oh, it was my sense of humor. It was my sense of patience. It was my sense of tolerance. It was my sense of forgiveness. I think to myself, these aren't gifts for a chosen few. These are birthrights for everybody. And it turns out they are. And the reason why love is in capital letters at the bottom of the page there is because these are all colors in love's rainbow. These muscles are there for everyone to use. They'll never fade away, but they will atrophy if we don't use them. And so this is our potential to use these in times of strength. Carl Jung called these the spiritual cures. They go by lots of different names, whether it's psychology or theology. But the idea is that we have the means to deal with the tough times. And this is how we do it. This is how we deal with the roadblocks, the stressors in our lives. And so, but it's not enough just to actually have those. We got to use them. And so spiritual health is actually putting them into play. It's the utilization and cultivation of these muscles of the soul. And so as I kind of round out the talk tonight, I want to just kind of tell you that this is so important. And this is the time that we're in right now to put these muscles into play. Our patience is being tested. Our humor is being tested. All of these everything's being tested. But it doesn't mean that we don't do them. It means that we actually need to be tested to become stronger. This is what resiliency is. If I had to put a definition on resiliency, I would say it is the triumph of the human spirit. And so how does the spiritual health get compromised? The ego, and basically 2 emotions, 2 unresolved emotions of anger and fear. And so how do we enhance the health of the human spirit? How do we see the triumph of the human spirit? We work through issues of anger and resolve them. We work through issues of anxiety and we resolve those. And I know it's not easy. I got an hour to try and share stuff which people have taken like 2,000 years to explain. So sense my frustration here, but it's all good frustration because I love talking about this stuff. And hopefully the fact that you're here tonight, you love listening to it. And hopefully you'll talk about it when someone says to you, where were you the last hour? Because as we talk about this, we begin to give ourselves permission to put these muscles into play, to realize that we have the ability to reach a higher potential than what stress has been showing us for the past, 2,000, 8,000 years, who knows how much long. I get a little concerned when I see that we haven't made much progress with all these wars going on the past 2,000 years. And I'm thinking we're in a very dynamic time right now where we're seeing a shift of consciousness. And that means that we're actually moving from fear to love. If I had to put this whole talk into a soundbite, it would be that. We're moving from fear to love. And all I'm going to ask is keep on moving. Don't get stuck in fear. Well, Joyce, we got a few minutes now for questions and comments.
What a beautiful presentation. And I understand that this could go on for hours. And that's the great part of having you on faculty at the Graduate Institute, because when you teach for days, and it's a beautiful experience. There's, you hit upon everything that seems to be the same, the wars, everything going on. A lot of that doesn't change, but it's so important to be grounded and have that love that no matter what is going on, we're okay, that we know all is well within us and we can still reach out to other people. I mean, everyone needs to learn this. That spiritual health is so important, so important.
Yeah, there's a bunch of wisdom keepers who say that basically Earth is a school to learn to love, and boy, is it a tough lesson. I suppose if it was easy,
yes.
We'd be out of here. Yeah, it's a tough lesson.
Yes, so thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. So needed, absolutely so needed. We could hear this every single day, and it takes time sometimes to really seep into us so that it's a natural reaction instead of fear, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. And, we've got a few things on the horizon. We got climate change. We got we got the rest of this pandemic we're moving through, coming out of. But when the virus is gone, we still have problems. We got some economic problems. We got we got some problems. So it's going to take all of us to come together to use these muscles of a soul for us to reach our highest potential.
Yes, absolutely. And if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. And we have, a few more minutes, and Brian Luke can answer them.
I got a few more slides to share if you want while we're looking for questions. You want to see
Sure.
next?
Yeah.
Let me close out of this. Let me just quickly go through here. This is a story I often tell, but I'm going to hold off on her because it would take the whole time. But it's a great book. So we have on the spiritual path, we have roadblocks and distractions. Roadblocks are stressors. Distractions are things which pull us off. And they usually begin as attractions. I say distractions begin as attractions. Alcohol, drugs, social media, things which kind of suck us in and we kind of lose track of time and ourselves as a consequence. But here's a wonderful poem that I thought I'd share with you. It goes like this. I do not ask to walk smooth paths nor bear an easy load. I pray for strength and fortitude to climb the rock-strewn road. Give me such courage, and I can scale the headiest peaks alone and transform every stumbling block into a stepping stone. Isn't that nice?
Beautiful.
Well,
Judy's question in the chat. We are going to have this on our website shortly. It's learn.edu. Very simple. That's for the Graduate Institute website, learn.edu. And we definitely will have this. This is something you really could watch over and over again and share with others, because it's a lot to absorb, and just kind of put it on pause and let that, part of it that what you just have here, a wonderful quote, let it sink in, become part of you.
Yeah. Sorry if I spoke so fast. I thought I have more slides, but I know I'd rather just end on a high note here. But I thought that if I spoke faster, I'd get through them quicker. But I don't speak this fast. But being originally from Connecticut, I suppose that's probably what I'm working
with. Absolutely. I hear that from so many people. Like my brother lives in South Carolina, and when he comes back here, he says, "You talk too fast."
I was giving a talk to a bunch of people from New York State, and I thought I had an hour and a half, but I had an hour, so I spoke faster. And at one point, I felt like I was foaming at the mouth, and I said, "Am I speaking too fast?" And they said, "No, not at all." I thought, "Oh, of course, I'm in New York." But I got one more thing I can share. Let's see if I got this here. Okay, little review to kind of sum things up. We got Dorothy, not a happy camper. She's looking for a way out of town, and bam, does she get one. And she ends up in a place she has no idea where she is. And she says, "I just want to go home." And she's told, follow the yellow brick road, follow the spiritual path. And so off she goes to try and get back home on the spiritual path, and as we all do. And she meets three pretty crazy characters. If you know anything about literature, you know that it will personify a trait to try and make a point. So we have courage, which is more like cowardice. We got intellect, which is more like buffoonery. And all the Tin Man wanted was a heart. So they're off to see the spirit, see the Wizard of Oz. Oh, here's a little take on but you didn't know that's what Seinfeld was all about, did you? So they meet both good and evil. Well, don't we all? And evil really is fear. And it turns out that Dorothy, in an act of compassion, takes a bucket of water when the Scarecrow is about to become a piece of toast, and she says, "I'm melting." She dissolved, basically herself, dissolving the veils of illusion. And so off to see the wizard. And by the way, the woman who played the Wicked Witch of the West, Margaret Hamilton, she was offered millions of dollars to recreate this role. And she said, "No, I want every kid who sees this movie to know she's never coming back." Isn't that great integrity? She turned down millions of dollars.
Wow.
So here we are, falling asleep on the spiritual path. Poppies. Great metaphor for falling asleep on the spiritual path. But the good witch comes and helps them out. They get on the road again, and obviously the wizard. And when they find out, the wizard is like them. This is called demasking the face of God. If you know any kind of work from Matthew Fox, it turns out he says, "I take it back home for you," but she misses the balloon ride. And then the witch says, "All you got to do is tap your heels 3 times and poof, say there's no place like home." Well, the first time I saw this, I was pretty much scared by the flying monkeys. But then afterwards, I caught on to the idea that this is actually a line from the Bible. The kingdom of God is within you. And every sacred text, whether it's the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, everything, they all have the message that you have the means to get home the whole time anyway. And that's what this was about. So home she comes. The hero's journey is complete, and it turns out that this guy played the Wizard of Oz. I'll tell you a cool story. I think we got time for me to tell you this. Frank Morgan played 6 parts in this movie, one of which was the wizard. And when it came time to film the scenes, the wizard, he said, "I can't wear this coat. This is not a coat a wizard would wear. I know my part. I know my character." And the head of wardrobe said, "Listen, you got 24 hours to find the right coat because we film you tomorrow." So he goes on the phone, he calls up his wife and says, "Meet me in the Salvation Army for lunch." And so they go to the Salvation Army. I guess it was downtown LA. And within 20 minutes, he finds the perfect coat. And that's the perfect coat because he's wearing it. And she says, "Listen, go back to your studio, rehearse your lines. I'm going to have this dry cleaned. And when you come home tonight, ta-da, be ready." So he gets home about 6 o'clock that night. And first thing, words out of his mouth are, "Where's the coat?" And she goes, "Coat's over on the couch, but you should take a look at it." And he goes, "Why? Something wrong?" And she says, "Just look inside the lapel pocket." So he takes the plastic off, looks at it, and says, "Oh my God. Inside was sewn the name of the previous owner in the lapel pocket. Frank Baum, the Wizard of Oz."
Wow.
No such thing as a coincidence. Isn't that
That
great?
gave me chills.
I know, pretty cool,
I
huh?
never heard that story.
So this is the health of the human spirit. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And Joyce, now the pitch for TGI.
Well, thank you so much again, Brian Luke. This has just been a fabulous time spending with you. And we're so blessed to have you on faculty. We really, really are. So if anyone is interested in the Graduate Institute, of course, our website is learn.edu. But during this time of COVID,